Mercantilism is an economic trade system where the government controls all the trade to maximize its profits. Now, this system is used currently today by China, but it was developed in the late 15th century, but it wasn't really perfected until the early 17th century. Now, countries that used this method at the time were Britain, France, and the Netherlands. Now, their primary item of interest was sugar. Now, sugar was a luxury item until the late 18th century, when the colonies in the Americas were able to mass produce them. While production was fairly easy, this labor supply was difficult to come by. To solve this problem, companies would go to West Africa and acquire and get slaves and bring them to the colonies. The slaves would do the work on the colonies, and then the finished product was sent back to their countries and then sold, thus creating an economic system where the profits were maximized by free labor and huge demand.
Soon after the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588, London merchants presented a petition to Queen Elizabeth I for permission to sail the Indian Ocean. The governor and company of the Merchants of London traded into the East Indies. They started as a monopolistic trading body, but the company became involved in politics and had soon enough acted as an agent of British imperialism. It was formed to trade for spices, but the company struggled in the spice trade because of competition from the already well-established Dutch East India Company.
A key thing in mercantilism was the plantation economy. Plantations economy were extremely hard to maintain. Although the land was mostly very cheap, the labor force was really hard to compensate for. To supply these demands, like sugar, they used slaves, mostly from the African countries. These slaves were used and transported in what is known as the transatlantic slave trade, which transported 10 million to 12 million slaves across the Atlantic Ocean. These slaves mostly worked on sugar plantations and were mostly used in the colonies of the Americas. The colonies needed these laborers, and without them, most likely most of the trade and success of the American colonies would not have been possible.
Sugar was primarily used as a luxury item until the 18th century, when the colonies wanted to make it available. The East Indian companies wanted to make profit off the sugar. Free labor from slaves allowed the East Indian Company to maximize in profit.
Sugar was primarily made in India. It was a luxury until the 18th century, until the colonies made it widely available through their Caribbean sugar plantations. It unleashed a lot of economic and social changes, and several landowners were grouped together to make large estates. It was extremely hard for the plantations to keep themselves running. The land was very cheap to own, yet supplying a labor force was very expensive. The owners were trying to stay in business while also making a profit. Using the slaves as a labor force, some of these landowners became very wealthy. This increases the transatlantic slave trade. Supply and demand fuels the success of these plantations.
I'm Spencer Robinson, and I approve this message.